Immigration and Customs Enforcement just posted the biggest arrest month in the history of the agency. More than 300,000 Haitians are staring down deportation after losing their legal status, and some Republicans are openly celebrating while others beg for mercy. Water systems in 7 states have been hit by cyberattacks. The Senate just voted 89-4 to move a stopgap bill that keeps the government's lights on, and the president is telling oil companies they have made, quote, too much money, and should cut what you pay at the pump. That is the day in one place. We also have a federal judge ruling New York cannot stop federal agents from covering their faces, the president publicly accusing his own prosecutor of choking, and a September date set for Jack Smith on Capitol Hill. 8 stories, biggest first, every one of them touching your money, your job, or your safety. Stay to the end because the last 2 tell you where the political fight goes next. Start with the number that defines the day. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has just recorded the biggest arrest month in the agency's history. Fox News reports that record comes on the heels of June, when ICE made roughly 43,000 arrests, and that 3 forces are driving the surge at once: a hiring push, a wave of new funding, and the end of the Department of Homeland Security shutdown that had been slowing operations down. Put those together, and you get an enforcement operation running at a pace it has never run at before. Here is the context that matters. An arrest is only the front door. Every person taken into custody has to be held somewhere, processed somewhere, and eventually removed or released. So a record month puts pressure on every link in that chain. Fox News also reports ICE is planning to surge arrests of Haitian migrants specifically, tied to the fight over temporary protected status, and cites Customs and Border Protection figures showing nationwide encounters with Haitians under the Biden administration approaching 500,000. What it means for you. If you employ people, rent to people, or live in a community with a large immigrant population, this is the month enforcement stopped being abstract. What is next is whether this pace holds into the fall, and Donald Trump has given no sign of easing off. Reported by Fox News, more than 300,000 Haitians just lost their lawful status in this country, and the Trump administration is planning to deport them. The Hill reports that status disappeared after a Supreme Court ruling in June that ended temporary protected status, the designation that allowed them to live and work here legally, and the political reaction is a genuine split screen. Some Republicans are openly rejoicing at the pending removals. Others in the same party are publicly pleading for leniency. That is not a small detail. It tells you this is not a settled question inside the governing coalition, and that pressure for carve-outs or delays is going to come from both directions. Here is why this reaches your life even if you have never met a TPS holder. 300,000 people with work authorization is a real slice of the labor force in construction, food processing, warehousing, elder care, and hospitality, and it is concentrated in specific metro areas rather than spread evenly. When that many workers lose the right to hold a job at once, the effect lands on employers, payrolls, and prices in those regions first. What is next? Watch whether the Republicans asking for leniency can win any delay, and watch how quickly removals actually begin. Reported by The Hill. This is the story on today's list most likely to touch you physically, not just financially. PBS is reporting on cyberattacks against water systems across 7 states. And notice the framing of that report. It is a what we know piece. That tells you something important on its own. The full picture is not public yet. The scope is still being established, and anyone claiming to know exactly who did this and exactly what they touched is going further than the reporting does. So let us be precise about what is confirmed. 7 states, water systems, cyberattacks. That is the story. Why it matters is straightforward. Water utilities are not banks. Many are small, locally run and operating on thin budgets, and they sit in that category of infrastructure where an outage is not an inconvenience, it is a public health event. That is exactly why this class of target draws attention from hostile actors in the first place. What it means for you today. Your water is delivered by a local utility, and your local utility is the one that has to tell you if anything changed. Notices, advisories, and service alerts are how this would reach your household. What is next is the accounting of which systems and by whom. Reported by PBS. The Senate just took its first real step toward avoiding a government shutdown, and the margin was not close. The Hill reports senators voted 89-4 on Monday to invoke cloture on a motion to proceed to the legislative vehicle for a continuing resolution, clearing the first big procedural hurdle for a stopgap funding bill. That vote count is the story. 89-4 is overwhelming bipartisan support, And The Hill notes the timing. This is happening ahead of this fall's midterms. Translate the procedure because it matters. A continuing resolution does not fund the government in any new or considered way. It keeps existing spending running so the deadline passes without agencies closing, and cloture on a motion to proceed is not passage. It is permission to start debating. There are more steps after this one, and the House still exists. What it means for you. If you are a federal worker, a contractor, or you depend on a federal service or benefit processing on time, this vote is the early signal that your paycheck and your paperwork probably survive this deadline. What is next is final passage and whether anyone attaches conditions that blow up that 89-vote coalition. Reported by The Hill. The president has a message for the oil industry, and it is a blunt one. CBS News reports Donald Trump said oil companies should cut gas prices because, in his words, they have been making too much money. That is a direct public demand aimed at a private industry over the single price that most Americans track without even trying. The number on the sign at the corner station. Here is the context. You need to read this correctly. A president does not set the price of gasoline. Pump prices come out of crude markets, refining capacity, seasonal fuel blends, regional taxes, and local competition, which is why the same week can bring very different prices in two states. So what you are watching here is pressure, not policy. It is the bully pulpit being pointed at a specific sector. What it means for your money. If you commute, and especially if you drive for work, this is the administration signaling that fuel costs are now a political priority, which usually means more attention, more job owning, and possible follow-up action aimed at producers or refiners. What is next is whether that pressure escalates into something with teeth, and whether the industry responds at all. Reported by CBS News. A federal judge has ruled that New York cannot ban federal agents from wearing face coverings. That is the decision, reported by the Associated Press, and it lands right in the middle of the biggest fight in American politics this year. Here is the background. As immigration enforcement has intensified, states and cities have pushed back with their own rules, and one of the flashpoints has been agents operating with their faces covered. Supporters of bans argue that an officer exercising government power in public should be identifiable. Supporters of masking argue that agents and their families face real threats when their identities circulate online. New York moved to ban the practice. A judge has now said the state cannot enforce that against federal agents. The deeper issue is the one that keeps recurring: how much authority a state has over federal personnel operating inside its borders. When those two collide, the courts decide, and today the courts decided against the state. What it means on the ground: if you live in New York, masked federal agents remain lawful there, and the video you see on your feed is not going to change. What is next is appeal, and copycat rules in other states meeting the same legal wall. Reported by the Associated Press. The president turned on one of his own, in public, by name. CBS News reports Donald Trump slammed Jeanine Pirro for dropping the reflecting pool vandalism cases, saying she, quote, choked. That is a remarkable sentence, so sit with it. The vandalism cases connected to the reflecting pool were dropped, and rather than defend that call or stay quiet, the president publicly attacked the prosecutor responsible for it and questioned her nerve. Why this matters beyond the insult. Charging decisions are supposed to be made on the evidence and the law, and dropping a case is one of the most routine judgments a prosecutor makes. When a president reacts to one by declaring the prosecutor choked, he is sending a message to every other prosecutor about what happens when a case is dropped rather than pursued. That is the part with consequences, and it does not depend on whether you think these particular cases should have gone forward. What it means for you. This is a live test of whether prosecutorial independence survives public pressure from the top, and the answer shapes who gets charged in this country and who does not. What is next is whether Pirro answers publicly, and whether the cases stay dead. Reported by CBS News. Mark the date, September 22. The Hill reports former special counsel Jack Smith has been invited to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee in late September, and the invitation came from the committee's chairman, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, who announced it Monday in a post on the platform X. Grassley's post read, in his own compressed style, that he is inviting Jack Smith to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on September 22. Two things to understand here. First, an invitation is not a subpoena. A witness can decline an invitation, and the Hill's report does not include any response from Smith, so nobody knows yet whether he shows up. Second, the venue matters. The Senate Judiciary Committee is where nominations, oversight of the Justice Department, and the legal fights of the last several years all converge, and the chairman controls the agenda. Why it matters to you. Jack Smith led the most consequential federal prosecutions in recent American memory, and a public hearing would be the first time he answers questions about that work in that setting. What is next is simple. Either Smith accepts, declines, or the committee escalates. Watch the calendar. Reported by The Hill. That was the whole day in one place. A record arrest month for ICE. 300,000 Haitians facing removal, water systems attacked in 7 states, a shutdown pushed back by an 89-4 vote, and a president telling oil companies to cut your gas price. A fresh collection drops tomorrow, same time, the entire day in one broadcast. So tell me, which of those 8 actually changes your week, the enforcement surge or the price at the pump? Drop it below. If this saved you an hour of scrolling, hit like and subscribe.